Says
Okay,
recording.
I
There
think
you
I
go.
got it. Okay, and share my screen again. Okay, so I just want to start by saying hello and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Tess Southern and I am the Ag Educator at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Madison County. And I also have my coworker Patty with me. I'll let her introduce herself. We're gonna have an introduction here in just a second. But if you would take a look at the screen and see some general housekeeping rules for during Zoom meetings, we ask that you mostly stay muted unless you have a question that needs to be answered right then. But we will also, because there's two of us, be really following the chat box. So feel free to put your questions in the chat box. And there's also an option to raise your hand. So if you select participant list, it'll bring up a little box that has like yes, no, a little hand raising thing. If you seem to find that we're lagging a bit, you might want to turn your video off if you have it on. Sometimes that will help that. And if you have any other questions, please let us know. Do you want to introduce it, Patty?
Sure. My name's Patty Catalano, and I'm the Ag Program Coordinator at CCE Madison, but I also have a degree in horticulture, and I have a small organic fruit and vegetable farm, and my husband and I sell at the Hamilton Farmers Market. So we are doing today, Tess and I, Seed Starting 101 to help you guys get rolling with starting seeds. The seed starting is happening right now, so this is a very timely presentation. And I'll let Tess take it from there.
Yes, we're going to be going back and forth a little bit. So please forgive us if we step on each other's toes some. We did not do a full practice run here because we both end up having so much to say that our practice run would have been the really good one. And so we're just gonna keep moving forward together like this. So some of the things that we're going to discuss in depth today are who we are and what we do, options for planting, reading seed packets because that can be a confusing task because all seed packets are not created equally. They are all a little bit different. Some materials that you might need for starting seeds and some tips and tricks. So first, let's talk a little bit about us. My name is Tess, and I have a degree in agricultural business management from SUNY Cobleskill. I have a background in dairy, but also have an aunt who owns a greenhouse. She's had that greenhouse for about 25 years. So I've spent a lot of time there and feel pretty familiar with planting, and I definitely know how to water plants because that was usually my task at the greenhouse. But I have a little bit of a general background on all things agriculture, so feel free to ask me questions about pretty much anything. Patty did talk a little bit about herself.
I feel like I'm being redundant. I skipped. I was all excited. I got ahead of myself. So I already talked about myself, and rather than be self-absorbed, we'll just keep going.
Sounds good. So this is Seed Starting 101, and first we're going to talk about our options for planting. 4 of the ways that we want to talk about today are direct seeded cool plants. I have to move this so I can see. Sorry, guys. Direct seeded cool crops, transplanted cool crops, direct seeded warm crops, and transplanted warm crops. And there are more options, but these are the ones that we want to focus on today that will be best for you when starting out if you haven't had a garden before. And speaking of that, I'm going to do a quick poll to find out who has gardened before and where you are at in your gardening journey. So let's see if I can get this to work. Does everybody see the poll? Yes, you must. Great. All right.
Looks like everybody's in.
We have, yes, looks like everybody has voted. So we've got 8%, so one person who's not gardened at all. Most of you fit into the category between 1 and 3 and 3 and 5 years. And then a couple of you who have been gardening forever, which is great. Love that. Okay. So, Patty, do you want to go ahead and talk about these?
Sure. Let me get the poll off my screen here. There we go. So when we talk about direct sowing, what we mean is literally there's no in-between step. The seed goes directly into the ground that it's going to be growing in. And certain crops, this is really great for. And if you've got a good seed company, they'll tell you that on the back of the packets. So you basically just start the seeds right in the garden. You don't buy small plants, and you don't start the seeds indoors. A lot of the cold crops or cold season crops are like this. So right now on our farm, we've sown kale, we've sown rapini, and the cabbages, and I know I'm missing one, some mustard greens. So those are all cole crops. Cole crops are things that are typically in the mustard family. So they're all related, but they're also called that because cold crops, there's two words there, C-O-L-E, cole, and cold, C-O-L-D. So they're referred to in both ways. So cold crops because they also don't mind the cold right now. So you can plant them actually twice in a year. You can plant them in the very early spring when the soil is just able to be worked. So literally maybe a couple weeks ago when we had a warm day, what's that, right? And you can also sow them again later in the season, like mid-August or so that they're germinating when the soil's still warm, but they're doing the rest of their process and getting big and ready to harvest in like October when you're getting frosts and cold seasons. So those are good examples of direct sow seeds or crops. And then there's transplanting. So there are two ways to transplant. You can buy the plants from a farm or a greenhouse or a store and then transplant them, or you can start the plants yourself indoors. You don't have to have a greenhouse. You can do it on a windowsill, especially for certain crops like tomatoes. And usually you want to go for transplants when a crop has a long season. So a really good example of that is tomatoes. You can start tomatoes inside on a windowsill, and they take quite a long time to get you your nice juicy red tomatoes. So you're going to want to do those from transplant. They're a warm season crop. You would really never start those directly in the soil because it's not going to be warm enough for them to germinate until maybe mid-June, and by then they're not going to produce anything until too late. So hopefully that all makes sense. Does anybody have any questions about what I just said? Okay. If you do, like she said, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Okay.
Great.
I covered it all.
Yep, I'm trying to move pages here.
Okay,
so I did list a few of the items that you might be really familiar with that go along with each of these categories. So some cold direct things, and these are items that you might be receiving if you belong to a CSA, year-round CSA. These are some things you might still be receiving now and have been receiving for like the last couple of cooler months. So spinach, that's a pretty common one to be getting right now. Arugula, radishes, some peas, red Russian kale, pak choy, beets, I think somewhat fall into this category. There are some beets you'll be getting now, but we have them listed in warm, but you can still get some now. There are certain ones.
They're one of those borderline, yeah, they're one of those borderline crops where they actually will germinate better in warmer soil. So you don't want to plant them as soon as the soil is workable in spring, because as you can tell from the 20 degrees we have this morning, so they may not like that. So you want to wait a little later in spring on beets.
Right. Cold transplants, items like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, radicchio, leeks, and onions. Some warm direct. Again, we have beets on this list. Some of the beets you'll be getting now might be in a greenhouse or in some sort of hoop house, so it is warmer in there. So again, beets, carrots, cucumbers, squash, corn, and beans, and some warm transplants. And these are, we already talked about tomatoes. The reason for that is they need the time to germinate and start growing before you take them outside. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, basil, melons, cukes, and squash. Now I have squash on both transplant and on direct. So sometimes it's easier to have them already started. I know for myself, I typically go buy my squash plants already started from a greenhouse, and I tend to find that I end up with better luck doing that. And that just might be that I don't know how to start them as well as I should.
Well, we've noticed this too, and I just wanted to mention a couple things. If you'll notice, most of the crops that the root is what you're harvesting, so beets and carrots, and there are other root vegetables out there like celeriac, those are going to be warm direct, and that's because if you plant them on your windowsill or whatever, and you transplant them, they're going to undergo transplant shock because they have a big root, that taproot. Okay, so it's a good rule of thumb that if the root is the thing that you are harvesting, parsnips, another good example, you're never going to want to transplant that. You're never going to want to start it early. You're going to plant that, sow those seeds right in the ground. And I've noticed with the squash, I have better luck too, because we have, and this will be one of the other classes, we have cucumber beetles very bad on our farm. So if you plant squash right in the ground, cucumber beetles eat on squash and cucumbers. They're both in the same family. So if you sow them right in the ground, they're so tiny when they come out that those cucumber beetles just completely decimate them. So if you can plant them as a transplant instead, they're bigger and they're more likely to withstand the damage from the cucumber beetles. So that's one thing we've noticed.
Great. So now we would like to talk about seed packets. This might seem like a simple task in just reading and understanding, but there's so many different types of seed packets that we feel it's warranted explaining some of the things on a seed packet so that you can better understand what you have and how it's supposed to be planted. So I have some seed packets here also. and I have the one that is currently on the screen, which is your garden bean, a green bean. And so when you're looking at it, typically on the top, and these are all things that are usually listed on the back of any sort of seed packet. Some of them have less on them than others. Like the garden bean has this beautiful section that has pictures and shows you all sorts of things. So the top is usually a paragraph about what you have. So this one explains that it's great yields, that you're going to get a lot. It's a bush plant instead of a pole plant for the beans. Does everybody know difference between bush and pole? So pole will climb. A bush is just your average bush. It'll go probably 1 to 2 feet, 3 feet. Depends on how big you let it get. And so this says it's going to have 6 to 7 inch dark green stringless pods, even in the summer heat. That they're easy to grow, no staking required, and ready to pick within 52 to 55 days. The next section is what I like to call the really, really important stuff. So this tells you that it needs full sun. So then if you have a garden that's partially shaded and you know that one side of it doesn't get as much sun as the other, make sure that these in particular are in that fully sunned area. It tells you your row spacing, your plant spacing, how deep to plant it, how many days to germination, and then the full plant height. So this says it'll be about 2 feet tall. I can assure you that these beans do germinate within 6 to 10 days because we did some of that here. And we planted these, started them about a week ago today, I think. And they've already got some great, I don't know if you can see it, some great growth coming out of them. So that's another thing you can do is test them. Do you want to?
I just want to, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
I just wanted to throw in here, does anybody know when it says 52 to 55 days, does that mean harvest from when you put the seed in the ground or from when you put a transplant in the ground? Does anybody know the answer to that? Answer in the chat if you'd like. See one answer. Anybody else want to take a stab? Okay. Okay. So 2 guesses for seed and 1 for transplant. It's actually transplant. If you don't transplant the plant, so garden beans you wouldn't, then it would be from when it sprouts. So you can expect that harvest 52 to 55 days after it actually sprouts. So when it comes to germinating seed, the quicker you can get your seed to germinate, the faster you're going to get your harvest, of course. Okay, that's all I had.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
The next portion on your seed packet will explain some gardener's notes. And this is usually information from folks who have been doing this much longer than maybe you or I, and maybe not as long as those people who answered that they've been doing this forever. But so like for the beans, for instance, they said they need warm weather to grow and sprout. Then they get down to the nitty gritty. Plant in the late spring after night temperatures reach 55. So obviously we're not going to be putting them in right now. We just haven't gotten there yet where our nights are warm enough. It explains how deep to sow them, how far apart, that they like well-drained soil, and that this one goes on to explain that you can sow these every 2 to 3 weeks until early summer so that you can have a continuous supply. So that's great information. So you don't have so you don't plant, 7 rows of beans and have them all ready at one time, because let me tell you, it takes a lot to pick that many beans. And if you don't have the time to sit out there and pick them all, you might want to plant, one short row of them now, and then in a few weeks plant another row so that you have a continual supply of them. It does explain when you should harvest. So as it said, they should be 6 to 7 inches long, the beans. So you can be looking for that in your garden. And then it says to pick the pods every other day to keep plants productive. So once you start seeing them become ready, make sure that you're picking regularly so that they can continue to produce for you. Along the bottom, it also has some important dates and information. So these seeds that you see here were packed for 2020. That means that they were probably put together at the end of last year or very beginning of this year and ready for this season. It also says that they need to be sold by 12/20. Most seed companies will ask that the places that are selling their seeds send them back after they were supposed to be for sale for the year. This is because seeds don't last forever. They will last quite some time, but they won't last forever. So every year, the chance of germination goes down a little bit more. So I showed you these seeds that we germinated at home. We just did this. I did this with my son in our windowsill. And we did this because we wanted to show people how to check your seeds. If you have seeds at home that you've had for 3 years, you can test them this way to see if they're still going to be fruitful. If they start to germinate, then go ahead and plant them. You might find that you have a couple packs. Certain things tend to not germinate. Even after a year, their chances of germinating cut in half or are cut drastically. Patty can tell us a couple of those seeds that you probably are not going to have luck with after that first or second year. So this is a way to test that at home if you do have some old seeds.
You really don't want to save onions, leeks, anything in that family, and also parsnips. Those are the ones that have pretty much no viability after about a year. If you decide to chance it, which I have, because I don't know, frugality, I'm try to be very frugal. Just remember that if you want to sow some onion seeds, say in year 2, you would want to sow them twice as thick as you would the year before. And there, later there's a slide with resources that has a seed viability chart. So bear that in mind, that every year passes, the viability does go down. So if you would normally sow 3 seeds in a hill of zucchini, oh, I know, zucchini, right? You might want to sow more than that if the seed is 2 to 3 years old, just to accommodate for the fact that some of the seed might not germinate, or it might all germinate and everybody's going to end up with zucchini in their cars and in their mailboxes trying to get rid of it, right? So
Traveling zucchinis. Okay, we do have a question here.
Yeah.
Does plant spacing and row spacing differ if using raised or deep beds? Do you want to answer that?
Sure. Not really, because the spacing that you see on those packets has to do with the above ground portion of the plant. Companies put that on there to tell you the optimum space in between so the plants can get enough light because a full sun crop like beans, the more light, the more flowers, the more flowers, the more beans. So that's why you want to follow that spacing. So it has more to do with the above ground portion. The kind of bed you're using really doesn't matter too much. But remember, so this says row spacing 1.5 to 2 feet, for example. You would measure in from the edge of your raised bed half of that distance, because the plant doesn't need that full distance from the edge of the bed, but it does need that full distance from another plant, because the other plant is what's going to shade it out and compete. Does that make sense? So that'll save you some space. Okay, good. Oh, Tess, you're muted.
I muted myself.
Okay.
We were able to answer that. And so does anybody else have any other questions before we move on?
I do. This is Suzanne.
Hi.
Hi, I came on a few minutes late. We had to find our cat. Anyways, you had shown a baggie with seeds in it.
Yeah.
And you said what you do to test it, but I didn't hear what you did. I saw the bag, but I don't know what you did.
I did not actually explain that, so let me do that right now. So what I did was used a baggie, and I have a paper towel, and it's about, these are like the half sheet paper towel, so if you have a full one, you just might want to fold it in half.
Okay.
And we took 3 bean seeds, and we had wet the paper towel, took the 3 bean seeds and laid them out and folded it in half, and then put them in the bag and taped it to the window.
Thank you.
So you can see here that all of them have sprouted. And the funny thing is, we must have taken a little too much moisture out when we first started them. We had one that really, really went ahead and got ahead of everything. And the other 2 kind of, you know, we could see one that was poking out just a little bit, but I watered them, re-wet the paper towel and hung it in the windowsill. We did that Tuesday, and now the other 2 have really taken off. So it's, you know, that 6 to 10, it really, some may take 6 days, some might take 10 days, some might take 4 days if it really gets everything it needs. So
thank you.
No problem.
There was a question a minute ago about, can you start seeds like tested in a Ziploc, or is it better to do in the little dirt starter cups? It is better to do it in starter cups of some sort, whichever you choose. We use a lot of peat pellets at our farm. We've just found that to be easier for us, because once the seed sprouts, you know, if you're doing just a couple for testing, that's one thing. But if you're doing enough for an entire row, you really run the risk of damaging that root, and that's not going to bode well for the plants. It'll probably be weaker. It might even die. So it's probably better to just do tests in a Ziploc bag, but do starting in actual soil.
Right. And we're going to talk about the items that you might need to start these at home as we move on through this. So we will likely answer some more of that question as we move forward. Okay, so as you can see, some of these packets, even being from the same company, can be very different. You get, in the garden bean that we just looked at, you get all the nice little pictures that show you what you're looking at. And on this tomato one, there are some more specifics. They say exactly when to sow indoors, and it specifies that they need to be sown indoors. The length of time from transplant to harvest, and you can see below that there are a lot of temperatures involved in tomatoes because they're just a little bit more sensitive than some of the other ones. Patty, I'll let you take it away with what we need.
Sure. Well, I've tried to start seeds in just about everything listed here. Again, the frugality, sometimes it backfires. So you can start seeds in just about anything that will hold soil. And if it also helps hold moisture, that's good too, because the thing that really helps seeds germinate, besides the specific temperatures for various crops, cold crops can germinate at 40-degree soil temperatures, whereas like you just saw in the seed packet, the tomatoes take a lot warmer soil temperature, something around the neighborhood of 75 to 80 degrees. So basically it's kind of a personal choice. If you want to dig around in your recycling and come up with some containers, poke some holes in them, put a tray underneath them, you can most definitely do that. This is one of those cases where you have to know yourself very well. If you are the kind of person who's very diligent, you can use a smaller container, because the roots of the seedling are going to fill a small amount of soil very quickly once it really starts growing. And that's okay as long as you're diligent and to get it out in the garden on time. Now, we get behind at our farm. So we tend for larger containers, larger cells, basically. The peat pellets are pretty good for most things, because sometimes I need my tomato plants to hold over in their 6-packs for a little while until I can actually get them in the ground. So it's really a personal choice as to what you use. We use cell packs and trays, and we use some peat pellets too. But we've also used regular soil. You don't want to really use soil that has fertilizer in it. For one thing, fertilizer doesn't help germination. And a lot of times when a seedling's very young, that extra fertilizer can actually damage it or make it grow a little faster than it really should. There have been studies done that if you artificially make vegetables grow faster, they're more likely to get insects like aphids, which we'll cover in another class. So it's a personal choice as far as containers go, but make sure you put some holes in them because they do need to drain. Your soil needs to be moist but not soggy because the seeds can rot. In really, really wet springs, we've actually lost seed in the ground because we had so much rain that the seed just rotted, unfortunately. So you can also buy the cell packs and the cell trays at places like Country Max or any other big box retailer if you want to try those. Now, there are a couple kinds of trays, and there are web trays, there are solid trays, and there are trays that have holes in them. So what we do is we buy the black plastic trays that have no holes, so they actually hold water. And when you do that, you can water from the bottom, which is very nice and gentle for seeds and stuff like that. But it's not absolutely necessary. If you're careful, you can water from the top just fine. So soil blocks are something I've always wanted to try. There's a little, I don't know what you want to call it. It's a gadget. And it takes soil and compacts it, not too much, but enough so that it holds a block shape, and then you can sow your seed right in it. How cool is that? Because once your seedlings start, the roots will hold that block together, and you just take it, put it in the ground. So one of these days, I'd actually like to try those. Tess, do you want to talk about the next list, or you want me to keep going?
You can keep going.
Okay. So some things to think about when you are sowing seeds is the soil temperature. Like I mentioned, the cold crops or cold season crops, they'll germinate a lot of times around 40 degrees soil temperature. Well, how do you take soil temperature? I use the same thermometer that I use in the kitchen I just wash it really well when I'm done. You just go out to a regular spot in your garden and put it in the ground and give it a few minutes and see what it says. Make sure you get it in deep enough. There's usually an indentation on the probe. That indentation actually denotes the best place to take the temperature. So you want to make sure that indentation is all the way in the ground. Sowing depth, usually it'll say on the seed packets. If you're like me and you save your seeds from year to year, if you can, the general rule of thumb is you want to sow your seed to the depth that is about 1.5 times the width of the seed. So if you're looking at a squash seed, that would be about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter, okay, which is about right. If you're looking at something like cabbage seed, which is a very tiny little round ball, that's going to be about 1/4 of an inch or maybe a little less, and that's about right. So 1.5 times the width of the seed is the rule of thumb. Water, I already mentioned a little bit. You want to keep things moist, but not so wet that you're going to rot your seed. So that's a tough one to explain. It's one of those things that you're going to have to maybe learn it in the School of Hard Knocks. But let me tell you, if you see something called fungus gnats, they're little black gnats, and they have eggs in the soil, basically. And if you keep the soil too wet, now this is your soil packs like in on your windowsill. So this is specific to things you're starting indoors. This won't happen outside in your garden. They'll start flying around. You'll see them. They're tiny little black gnats. And that means you're keeping your soil much too wet, because if you let it dry out a little bit, they can't survive. So that's the trick there. So that's a bad sign. So just learn from that. Light is another thing to think about, because some seeds actually require light to germinate. Lettuce is one of them. If you sow your lettuce 1/4 or 1/2 an inch below the soil, you're not going to probably get very good germination. Another trick is soaking the seed. Lettuce also can be soaked. And I've actually soaked our lettuce seed to the point where it starts to germinate in the water. And that's not actually a problem. I just put it in the ground gently, and we get very good germination that way. Also labeling. I've had some disasters with trays that I didn't label. They got mixed up, and I thought it was a Roma tomato, and it ended up being a beefsteak. So make sure you label what you're doing. It's very important, at least if you want to know, exactly what it is you grow from year to year, which is pretty important too, because then you can not repeat the same mistakes. If you didn't like a variety, you can not grow that again. But how will you know if you don't remember to label it? So let's see, optional items. So you can start plants inside under LED lights or grow lights, stuff like that. That's very successful. I've done that several times. Just remember that you're gonna wanna have a way to keep the lights at the proper distance from the tray. And a little trick I used to do was I would actually put telephone books underneath the tray and raise the tray up so that it was only a couple inches from the light when they weren't germinated yet. And then once they germinate, you can just take a layer of the books out and lower that tray back down so that you aren't getting the light too close or too far away. It's adjustable that way. Heat mats are a really great thing for anything that needs warm soil. So those tomatoes are going to germinate overnight practically if you have a heat mat. They're not too expensive. You just find a flat surface, put them on there, and put the tray on there. So one thing to remember too is most seeds, except for lettuce, they don't really need light to germinate. So you can put them anywhere. You can put them on top of your refrigerator and put a garbage bag over them to keep the moisture in until they germinate. You have to be careful in checking that, okay? Fertilizer and compost. Once things are up, you're going to want to use fertilizer. And when I mean fertilizer, I mean like the Miracle-Gro type stuff. But before that, you can use things like vermicompost. That can be mixed right into your soil when you sow the seed because it's such a mild fertilizer. It's more of an amendment, a soil amendment really, than a fertilizer, although it does have nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus too. And compost is not a bad idea either. Sometimes I actually mix my own seed starting soil with a little bit of compost, a little bit of peat moss, and some native soil, just a little bit of native soil, because the seeds don't care really what kind of soil they're in. It doesn't matter till they germinate and they start needing those nutrients. So that's one thing to remember. Stick tags. If you are labeling your stuff, you need something to label it with. And I found a handy trick. If you or someone you know has those vinyl Venetian blinds, sometimes I see them actually out at the road. People have thrown them away because they just break. I have a set that I found like 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm still making plastic tags out of them, and they work great and they look great. They're just white tags. So those have worked really great, but you can also buy them at the store. You know, that's fine. We grow things in such large quantities that wasn't really very feasible for us. So thanks. And finally, another optional item is hoods for your trays. So if you do decide to invest in some trays, they're not that expensive and they're reusable year to year if you keep them out of the sun once you're done with them, because the sun will degrade them because they are plastic. So we've had some of ours for probably 6 or 7 years though, because we just store them properly when they're not in use. So the hoods are a clear plastic covering that you can buy that goes over the tray, which will keep the heat from escaping so quickly and keep the moisture from escaping so quickly. Now, I also mentioned earlier, a garbage bag also works. So we've done a little of both. We have some hoods, but I also have some trays this year in garbage bags. So it's really kind of a personal preference. Either one will work. And I think that's about all.
So I'm gonna try and move the page on. Okay, so I'm going to try and walk you through some of the ways that I'm moving all of your faces around here so I can see the screen. Some of the ways that you can do this at home. So, like I said before, my aunt owns a greenhouse, so I'm able to go snag some things of hers and show you some of the ways we can do this at home. So there are some things that most of you might have right at your house that you can use to start your plants inside. I know because I've been home, I've gone through a ton of orange juice. And so this is just a 2-quart orange juice container. I cut the bottom off, and there's actually a nice little line around it that I followed. So you can fill that. I've got some peat moss in here. I also had a 50/50 container, same size, 2 quarts. So this is a really good option. Now, these do have that coating on the outside, so they'll hold moisture in. The goal is to not get them too terribly wet. Another thing that I was able to grab This is another good option to start them in at home. This can hold 6 full-sized or plants as they're getting up towards transplant size. Something that you might want to do, obviously you're going to probably plant more than 6 seeds in here. You can, once they start coming up, lay some string, which I should have brought some string out and I didn't. If you lay your string across the center and then split it into 6, so you'll put 2 more here. Once they start coming up, you really only want to have 1 full-size plant in each of those spots that you'll put with the string. That helps prevent overcrowding once you start moving, once they're growing in here, and makes it easier once you start to transplant them from here out into your garden. Now, I know Patty said that she has some plastic trays that she plants into. This is a plastic 6-pack here. And I did grab some miscellaneous tags to show you guys what those tags are like. Now, these ones are very, very specific. They have what it is and has some information on it, kind of like your seed packet will, and sometimes they come with seeds when you purchase your seeds. So these do just what this bigger one does in splitting it up. So you've already got your packs of 6. You'll know exactly each one. When Patty was talking about the, now I'm gonna forget, the soil pack, the, what is it called now? I've forgotten.
The soil blocks?
Soil blocks, that's what it is. That basically, the soil block does what these little packs do. So once these start to grow, you can pull them out individually and transplant them. And I do see that Patty's talking about Divine Gardens. I have some of the vermicompost here. So this is the vermicompost that is produced locally to Madison County. This is a Madison County farmer. She uses the manure from her cattle that she has on her farm, and then she heats that up and then transfers it over into her worm bins, and that's where she gets the vermicompost from. And all I do is mix that with the peat that I have here. You don't have to use that much, and I'll also use a little bit of this in my gardens outside. Does anybody have any questions about the items that I have here?
I have a question about the vermicompost.
Sure, go ahead.
You only need to use a little bit,
Yep.
not much. So how much would you use for how much? I don't, can you give us
Sure.
an example?
So there's some great rules on the back of her package here. And when starting seeds, this says to add 10% of the to your favorite seed starting mix. So if you have, you just want to use 1/10 of whatever.
Okay.
For seed starting.
Okay.
Same with new plants. You can use a little bit more with established plants.
Okay.
And she also has on her website a recipe to make vermicompost tea. So basically you steep this into a liquid form and then you can water your plants with it.
Okay. And do you have her website for us, or?
Sure, we can put it right. Oh, Patty's already done it.
Awesome.
Look
Great.
at her go.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, this is a really great product that we like to use. I know I've used it on some of my house plants to perk them up a little bit, and it's been wonderful. Okay, let's see here. Here's some helpful resources that Patty put together. I'm going to let her explain some of those to you.
Okay. So on our website, there's a great chart about first planting dates for our region. So it'll help you get a handle on when it's okay to plant certain things, you know, based upon soil temperature and outside temperature too, because it's amazing how long it takes the soil to really warm up. A lot of times we don't get our tomatoes in the ground till Memorial Day. So unfortunately, that's the way it works. We just cheer them on all season long. So that's the first one. The second one is the seed viability chart I told you about. And it talks about how long in ideal storage, that's the key phrase, how long your seed will be viable for. So squash, corn, and beans, I think, are the top three. They can last up to maybe 5 or 6 years, but that's if they're in ideal storage. Now, what is ideal storage? Ideal storage for most seeds is actually found in your refrigerator. So if you can store some seeds in your refrigerator, they will last quite a bit longer than if you were to just put them downstairs in your basement, which is actually a bad idea because of the moisture. You want to maintain a somewhat dry environment. We actually have little silica packets, and we put the little silica packets in the bottles with our saved seeds from year to year. That works really well for us because moisture and probably heat and moisture are the two things that really kill the viability of your seeds. So that's what that chart is. And the soil temperatures for germination, there's a range for germination. So that chart has this is the absolute best temperature that your tomatoes or your cantaloupe or whatever will germinate at. But it also has a minimum germination. So that can be useful if you don't have a real warm spot, but you want to know so that you can tell, well, should I wait? Should I go ahead and sow some seeds now? This will help you figure out just the bare minimum temperature. So you'll still get germination, but maybe not as fast. And, you might get one seed that comes up and then all the others come later or something like that. So that's what that third resource is. Okay.
There's also, we did just have a question about getting these resources. We will send them out in an email. We'll send a survey also about the presentation that we did. So we'll include these links. Plus I have a sheet that has when you should plant. Patty, it may already be in one of these links and I'm just not aware of it, but what plant and when you should plant it, that might be in the first planting dates of Madison County one, but there's another sheet too that we have that we can include. We have another question.
I think, yeah, I just saw that. Let's see. Trying to find the right view here. It's not showing on my screen.
You want me to read it? Should the seed packets be put into a plastic bag or just place the packet in the refrigerator?
A plastic bag certainly won't hurt. And it'll keep, it's a refrigerator, things spill. So it will add a little bit of extra protection. So that's probably okay, as long as the seeds are perfectly dry. So if they're store-bought seeds, that's fine. If you save your own seeds, then, that's where you can get into trouble. So make sure that they are perfectly dry before you put them in a plastic bag, okay? There was something about soil temperature too. I don't know why, but the chat won't show me.
Sure, let's see. What temperature does the soil have to be? Dawn, when are you speaking of, like, at what point are you wanting to know about soil temperature?
the first planting dates.
Sorry, yes. I'm just wondering, like, is there a certain temperature for all plants that you like start inside that you've already like germinated?
So you're asking if there's kind of like a baseline temperature for anything that you start inside? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes.
Okay. When you start things inside, generally your soil temperature is going to be a warmer temperature. So like it's not, your soil temperature inside is not going to be 40 degrees, but there is a range for things like broccoli, you know, cole crops. So it's from maybe 40 to 60 degrees or something like that. I'm honestly not sure. So you'll want to check that chart. Most of the time, your indoor temperature is going to be fine for starting just about anything, as long as it's not on a really sunny windowsill for cold crops, because they're weird. They want to germinate when the soil is a little bit warm, but once the soil temperature hits something crazy like 70 or higher, then they're just not even interested. They won't germinate at all. Okay, so if you're starting inside on a windowsill, it's still crop dependent, but it's less sensitive inside than it is outside, because you have your thermostat and you're inside where the environment's controlled. So it's likely you'll be able to start more things in that controlled environment than waiting for soil temperatures to get to what they need to be outside. Does that make sense?
So if like there's no threat of frost anymore, basically, is that like
Well,
kind of a good time to
well,
know?
outside, it depends on the crop outside. So when you're outside, you have to really pay attention to the soil temperature for the particular crop. So beans, they need very warm soil. We don't sow our beans usually till the first or second week in June. And yet we've already sown our cole crops, our cold season crops, like I mentioned earlier, the kale, rapini, mustard greens, and cabbages. So they only need a range of somewhere between, like I said, 40 and 60. So, and some of them have germinated. The lettuce, our lettuces have already germinated. So does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I know that I have also been told in the past that to go ahead and put the like the cold temperature crops in the ground, you should be able to work the soil with your hands for at least a short period of time before your hands are like ice cold. And you shouldn't be planting those warmer weather crops until you're able to work in the soil with your hands for an extended period of time before your hands get super cold and that you're not able to work with it anymore. So that's a good, Patty, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've had several people tell me that you should be able to work with it for quite a long time before you're able to put those warm weather crops in there.
That sounds reasonable. And another thing I want to mention is, you know, everybody's piece of land is unique to you. So I live in a valley. I live in a place that's colder than Norwich, which is not that far away. So, you know, our temperatures are definitely colder than some of the other places that aren't far away. There are microclimates here and there because of the hills and the valleys. So, you know, pay attention to what your land is trying to tell you, because you may be able to plant your tomatoes a week before me. And if you grow vegetables, you know, with tomatoes, a week can make a big difference in whether or not you're able to get in that big harvest. Okay, so just pay attention to what your land is telling you, because everybody's is unique. Any other questions? We're at 4:03. We should probably wrap up.
So the last thing that I wanted to put here is obviously we are Cornell Cooperative Extension of Madison County. If you need to get a hold of us, unfortunately at the moment, we are not in the office. We are working from home, which is why our backgrounds are a little bit different from normal office setting. So you can reach us at our P.O. box, or you can give us a call. Okay, so we have a question about the seeds. If you signed up for seeds through Planting with Purpose, those seeds are going out first thing tomorrow morning. I worked on getting all of them addressed and, oops, sorry, my dog's gonna bark. This is what it's like to be at home, guys, sorry.
Almost made it. It's only without anything.
Quite impressive to get this far before a dog barked. So those seeds will be going out first thing tomorrow morning. So you should have them, I'm fingers crossed, the beginning of next week. We had some hiccups with the postage. So that was a little bit difficult, but we are making it work and everyone should have them shortly. So you'll be getting those. If you have any further questions for us, you can reach out to both Patty or myself. You can email us or give us a phone call on the phone. Our extensions are not listed here, but if you call that phone number, then you can patch through to either of our extensions, and those are actually transferred to our cell phones. So we're holding normal office hours from home, so you can contact us on those at any point in time. For those of you who weren't aware of the seeds, we do have a few spaces open, and I can add that in into the email that's going out for those of you who did not have access to them yet. Unfortunately, once those spots fill up, we will not have any more. We're sending out 101 packets of seeds to families across Madison County and a little outside of the county. We did have a few people sneak in. It's about 80% of the folks that are getting seeds are located in Madison County. So if there's no further questions, I will give you a chance to put some questions into the box here. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we hope we are able to answer some of those questions. Thanks.
He says goodbye.
Bye-bye. See you next time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Great. Have a great day, girls. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Tess, there's another question about getting on the list for the seeds. Ooh.
I'm going to try and stop sharing the screen really quickly
Sure.
so that I can get that information. I'm also going to stop recording, so thank you.